The dawn light was brittle, slicing through the frosted windows with a pale, unforgiving edge. My breath came in ragged bursts as I pulled on thick gloves and stepped outside, snow crunching beneath my boots. I'd left the world behind when I come here, no neighbors, no distractions, just the vast white wilderness and the promise of solitude. But solitude can twist into something far more sinister when you're truly alone. I made my way down the slope to inspect the traps I'd set before the sun rose. My eyes, still gritty with sleep, roved over the pristine snow and froze. Footprints. They were human. Fresh, defined, each toe and heel stamped with chilling clarity. They hadn't been there yesterday. I'd walked this yard 100 times since the last snowfall. This was impossible. My pulse thundered in my ears as I followed the tracks. They led away from the cabin, then arced back in a perfect circle, tracing the boundary of my sanctuary. The symmetry was too deliberate, too calculated. It felt like a mocking invitation. I'm here, but you can't see me. A cold knot of dread clenched my stomach. My chest tightened in a surge of horror. What kind of person would do this? And why? I took a step closer to the circle's inner rim, where the snow lay untouched. A shrill wind whipped across the clearing, carrying an eerie emptiness that settled over me like a burial shroud. My skin prickled, as though unseen eyes were drilling into my back. With each breath, the cold seemed to deepen, dragging the warmth from my lungs. The silence pressed against me, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the faint hiss of ice crystals dancing on the breeze. Desperation rose behind my ribs. I scanned the tree line, half expecting a figure to detach itself from the shadows. There was nothing, only skeletal pines swaying, indifferent to my terror. My rational mind fought back, maybe an animal, a lost traveler, some harmless prank. But every rational thought was drowned by the panic pooling in my veins. With trembling fingers, I reached for the door handle behind me, convinced that as soon as I turned, I'd find someone, or something, waiting there. It stepped the only proof that I wasn't alone in this frozen hell. I yanked the door shut and slammed my shoulder against it, chest heaving as if I'd sprinted miles in minutes. My gloved hand found the deadbolt, and I turned it with a metallic click that felt like the last barricade between me and something unnamed. Inside, the air was stale but safer than the merciless cold outside. Yet every phantom footstep I'd imagined seemed to thump against my skull. I dropped my pack and moved to the window, peeling back the heavy curtain. My breath fogged the glass as I peered into the snow-blank canvas. The footprints were gone, erased by a windstorm or an intentional scrubbing, but fear told me that whoever made them was still out there, watching. My reflection in the glass looked gaunt, bloodless, eyes rimmed with panic. With trembling fingers, I dialed my satellite phone. No signal. The dial tone mocked me, a silent accusation that I was utterly cut off. I grabbed a flashlight from the table and clicked it on. The beam jittered over the walls, illuminating my own shadow elongated and trembling. That's when I noticed it, a single footprint, imprinted on the scratched wooden floor near the stove. The toe pointed toward the bedroom. My stomach churned. I hadn't set foot in here since yesterday. How had someone slipped past the locked door? My mind screamed that this was impossible, yet here was the proof, mud still flecked around its edges. A soft crack echoed behind me, like a knuckle rapping on thin drywall. I whirled, light slicing through the gloom, but saw only the narrow hallway leading to my bedroom. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out reason. Every nerve in my body bristled with raw terror. I realized I had two choices: barricade myself in the bedroom or stand my ground and face whatever I'd let inside. My hand hovered over the hallway entrance, knuckles white around the flashlight. I couldn't decide which horror would come first, the one I'd chased away, or the one waiting in the dark. I pressed my back against the hallway wall, chest pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Sweat stung my eyes as I forced myself forward, gripping the heavy hatchet until my knuckles whited. Each small step toward the bedroom felt like wading through tar, sound deadened, world narrowed to the beam of my flashlight and the sick thrill of fear tightening in my gut. The hallway door creaked open a fraction, and I lunged, swinging the hatchet in a wild arc. The blade bit into wood, not flesh. It shuddered loose splinters, and a figure staggered into the light, a man, gaunt as a starving wolf, parka torn, eyes wild with terror that mirrored my own. For a heartbeat, I hesitated, terrifying realization crashing over me that this was no ghost, no legend stalking the Alaskan wastes, but a breathing, bleeding human being. His breath came in ragged gasps as he lifted trembling hands, smeared with the same mud caked on the floorboards. "Please," he whimpered, voice cracking under the weight of exhaustion. "I didn't mean to frighten you. I got lost after the storm." His story tumbled out in broken fragments. He and a friend had been trapping game, the snowdrift blocked their path. They'd followed faint tracks hoping for rescue, never dreaming those tracks would lead them here. Rational thought returned in shards. I glanced at the floor, inside my sanctuary, nightmarish footprints proof of flesh and blood trespass. The horror of what I'd almost done flared hotter than the fear itself. Setting the hatchet aside, I sank onto the cold floor, knees shaking, and propped him against the wall. He coughed, spitting bloody frost from his lungs, and I pressed my parka into his hand for warmth. We waited in silence as the first pale light of dawn seeped through the windows. I tried my satellite phone again, still no service. My mind reeled. I was both jailer and rescuer, alone with this broken stranger in a cabin built for solitude. The horror lay not in ghosts or demons, but in how thin the line could be between hunter and hunted, sane and savage, human and monster. When the sky brightened to a cold blue, I bundled him in blankets and loaded him onto my snowmobile. He shivered, half-conscious, as I revved the engine and pointed us back towards civilization. Behind us, the cabin looked peaceful, its footprints erased by drifting snow. Yet I knew the terror wasn't housed within those walls, it was in the endless white around us, the knowledge that any of us could disappear, swallowed by wind and ice, leaving only a ring of tracks as a final, terrifying signature. Hours later, at the ranger station, they coaxed the man inside, gave him food and warmth. I stood outside on frozen ground, watching the wind swirl new patterns in the snow. The circle would form again someday, I'm sure, and another terrified soul would find those footprints and wonder if something supernatural stalked the Alaskan wilds. But the truth was far more horrifying. Out here, any one of us could become the ghost, the intruder, the horror. And nothing, not hope, not logic, can always keep the cold and silence from closing in. I woke to the hollow echo of my own heartbeat, my breath fogging the window pane as dusk bled into night. My 3 huskies, Luna, Coda, and Axel, stood at the threshold, their bodies rigid, hackles raised like iron bristles. Then they howled. Or at least I thought they did. Their jaws opened in perfect unison, but no sound escaped. It was as if the night itself had swallowed their cries before they left their throats, leaving only the twitch of their muzzles. I pressed my palm to the cold glass, watching their silhouettes flicker in the lantern light. The wind carried nothing but the distant scrape of ice against wood. No guttural baying, no mournful ululation, just the grotesque pantomime of terrified dogs begging for a terror I could neither see nor hear. My chest seized with panic. Each breath tasted of fear, metallic and sharp, like blood on ice. I slipped on my boots, heart thundering so loud I feared it would fracture my ribs. Every step toward the door felt like wading through a nightmare. When I opened it, the cold bit through my parka, but the real chill crawled up my spine. The dogs pressed against me, fur bristling, eyes wide and unblinking. Their mouths moved, but there was nothing, only the terrifying stillness of the dark forest beyond. Night wrapped around us, oppressive and silent. I flicked my flashlight across the yard, the beam slicing through snow-laden pines. No movement. No shape. Just that oppressive quiet, as if the world had held its breath along with my dogs. I closed the door behind me, bolting it, yet the eerie pantomime of their silent howls echoed in my skull. I knew sleep was impossible now. Somewhere out there, beneath that indifferent black sky, something was watching, and it had turned my guardians into harbingers of horror. I slammed the door shut and bolted it, my ribs still rattling from the bone-dry howl my dogs had mouthed in perfect, soundless unison. Luna's eyes glinted with pure dread as she pressed her muzzle against the wood, Coda's hackles rising like bristling iron blades. Axel whimpered in a rasping, throat-clenching stutter of breath. Every instinct screamed that danger lurked beyond that door, but what kind of threat could freeze my companions' voices into silence? I stumbled to the corner where my handheld camcorder lay, fingers fumbling against ice-numbed metal. I hit record, the red LED glowing like a single, accusing eye. Through the frosted lens, the screened image of my front yard looked tranquil, pristine snow, skeletal pines swaying in the weak lantern glow. Nothing. Yet every tap of distant branches, every hiss of wind felt like a footstep creeping closer, a phantom observer delighted in my mounting panic. Turning off the camera, I tore through my pack for my old hunting rifle. Its worn stock fit against my shoulder like a promise of safety, its barrel cold as death. Luna paced in tight circles at my feet, claws scraping a jagged rhythm on the wooden floor. I pressed a hand to her flank. Her fur was bristly and wet with sweat, trembling under my palm. Coda and Axel crouched behind me, their silent howls etched onto the curve of their spines. I realized with sick fascination that I had never felt so alone, even with 3 living creatures at my back. Heart hammering, I inched the bolt out of the rifle, chambering around with a metallic click that sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. The door loomed ahead, dark and flat. My breath caught in my throat as I wrenched it open a crack, the hinge shrieking in protest. Outside, the lantern light spilled onto the deep snowdrift, revealing nothing but an unbroken sea of white. The dogs froze, their muzzles quivering, eyes insane with terror, yet I saw it then, a single set of footprints leading away, vanishing into the pines. No tracks returned. No second set to match mine. My grip tightened on the rifle. Was this some intruder's twisted game? Or had my mind cracked under the solitude's weight, conjuring horrors from the endless white? The wind picked up, carrying a whisper so low I thought I'd imagined it, until every hair on my neck stood on end. The terror wasn't just out there. It was creeping in here, inside my skull, feeding on doubt. I stepped onto the porch, boots sinking into snow, the dogs yelping in silent panic at my side. Every nerve blazed with anticipation. Whatever waited beyond those shadows was real. And I was the bait. I pressed the rifle's stock against my shoulder as I stepped onto the porch, the dogs moving at my side like living talismans. The single set of footprints stretched into the forest, an unnerving invitation into the silent abyss. Each snap of a snow-laden branch sounded like bones breaking. The wind clawed at my face, sucking the warmth from my lungs and leaving me hollow with dread. The flashlight beam caught a smear of blood on untouched snow, vivid against the white, and dragged my gaze deeper into the pines. Heart hammering, I followed the jagged trace until I stumbled on a man half buried in the drifts, his eyes glassy with terror and cold. He coughed up frost from his throat and clung to me with trembling hands. Relief warred with revulsion as I hauled him upright, feeling the sticky warmth of his wound seep through my gloves. Behind us, Luna, Coda, and Axel pressed close, their silent howls a chorus of warning that twisted my guts. I kicked over the snowmobile and we shot down the slope, the cabin shrinking into the gray miasma. I dared not look back, but in my peripheral vision the pines seemed to shift, though there was nothing there. Still, the dogs raised their muzzles in a final, haunting pantomime of howling, their jaws opening in perfect unison with empty silence spilling out. My pulse thundered as I realized the true horror wasn't the frozen stranger or those phantom footsteps, but the oppressive quiet that can drive the mind to conjure monsters. In the Alaskan wilds, the scariest terror is knowing that when all sound fades, your greatest nightmare is the one you carry inside. I stepped onto the frozen river at dawn, each breath crystallizing in front of my face like shards of glass. The ice groaned under my weight, a deep, mournful crack that rattled through my bones. My boots sank an inch into the slick surface, cold seeping through the rubber until I felt it in my marrow. Every step felt like walking on a tomb, the world reduced to white silence and the dreadful knowledge that the dark water lurked just beneath. Halfway across, a sudden pop sounded, sharp as a gunshot, and I froze, heart hammering so loud I was sure it would split my ribs. Beneath the ice, a faint slither of movement brushed against the underside, too fluid for stone or debris. I shone my flashlight down, the beam quivering, illuminating murky shapes that shifted in concert with my reflection. My skin crawled as I realized they followed my every move, gliding inches from the surface, yet never breaking through the ice's frail barrier. A surge of terror coiled in my gut, twisting logic into knots. Was it a drowned animal, hungering for warmth? Or something more sinister, a living thing trapped under the ice, starving and desperate? My pulse thrummed in my temples as I knelt and pressed a gloved hand against the frozen sheet, half expecting claws to tear through. The ice was solid, yet the distorted faces beneath stared up at me, faceless and silent, and I couldn't tell if my mind was cracking from fear or if something truly horrific waited to emerge. I forced myself to move, breath ragged, every step a gamble between survival and a plunge into that black void. My flashlight's beam wavered, the batteries dying, and the river below transformed into an abyssal maw, its surface trembling with every heartbeat. I heard a soft thud, like something heavy colliding with the ice, and froze. The sound echoed in the hollow silence, and a human heartbeat answering mine. Kneeling, I pressed the beam against the ice's underside. Shards of frozen water clung to the lens as shapes shifted in the gloom, elongated limbs, a torso rocking with desperate momentum. My stomach lurched with nausea as I imagined a drowned body thrashing below, fingernails scratching at the brittle ceiling. The faintest smear of crimson trailed across the white below, as though the thing beneath carried fresh wounds, fresh horror. Panic gnawed at my lungs. I yanked the ice pick from my pack and drove it into the surface, half hoping to shatter the barrier and expose the truth. The pick cracked the ice, just a hairline fracture, but enough for a rivulet of cold water to seep through, chilling my gloves through to bone. I recoiled as if burned, the drizzle of melting ice like cold blood dripping over my fingers. My heart pounded so violently I felt it thump against my diaphragm. Then came a rasping breath from the blackness beneath. It wasn't the wind. It was low, ragged, unintelligible, yet unmistakably human. I stumbled back, weight shifting on thinning ice, a spine-tingling dread flooding my senses. The river gurgled quietly, a sinister undertow beckoning me forward even as every instinct screamed to run. I turned on my heel, only to find fresh footprints behind me in the thin snow, leading away from the far bank, back toward me. I stood, paralyzed, as the realization hit, I was not alone, and the real terror was only beginning. I stumbled backward, heart hammering as the rasping breath bubbled up from the black water beneath my feet. The ice groaned like fractured bone, and I saw fresh footprints appear behind me, sole prints heavy and deliberate, crunching in the thin snow. I spun, raising the rifle in a shaky arc, flashlight beams slicing the blizzard. Through the swirling light, a figure emerged, a hunter's parka stained crimson, eyes wide with the same terror I felt. "Jesus, are you hurt?" he rasped, voice cracked as if he hauled himself through ice and blood. My mind screamed that this was another phantom, another trick of the wind. But his hand shook as he lowered a bleeding forearm, revealing the truth. A stray bullet had nicked him hours ago, and he'd bled out under that riverbank, unconscious until I summoned him from the drift. The shape thrashing beneath the ice had been a half-drowned deer, caught in a hidden fissure. Its desperate thrashings, the gurgled rasp I'd mistaken for something inhuman. Relief ripped through me, but the nausea stayed. We hauled him onto the bank, the wound bleeding fast as ice melt, and I wrapped him in my parka. Together we limped back to my cabin, every snapped branch and moan of the wind reviving the horror in my bones. Inside, I lit a fire, belt-pressed the rifle against my lap, and watched the flames dance. He drifted into fevered sleep. I stared into the embers, certain that any second the darkness might press its face against the window, bring back that gurgling breath. I never did hear it again. In the harsh expanse of the Alaskan wild, there were no ghosts, just the whispering wind and the fractured shape of reality when fear twists your mind. And though dawn chased the final shadows away, I carry that rasp in my skull, a terrible reminder that our own terror can carve horrors deeper than any creature lurking beneath the ice. I woke to the thin scrape of metal against wood, the first aid kit lying half buried on my porch, its tin lid scratched and dented. Snowflakes danced in the lantern light, settling on the box like silent witnesses to something I couldn't yet understand. I knelt in the cold, prying it open with numb fingers. The interior was a grotesque surprise. Every gauze pad unraveled, the bandages gone, and a smear of dark, dried blood trailing along the edge. Inside, folded beneath stained cotton, was a note scrawled in jagged letters, "Help me before dark." The words wavered on the page, as if written with a trembling hand bleeding its last strength. My heart slammed against my ribs, each beat a thunderclap of panic. How had this kit ended up here? Who had ripped through its supplies and left this plea? The idea that someone was hurt, maybe dying somewhere in the storm, sent a cold dread twisting through my gut. I stood, tucking the note into my coat. The wind hissed down the valley, carrying a hollow emptiness that felt like a patient listener to my fear. Every shadow among the trees pulsed with possibility, an injured stranger crawling toward me, or something darker stalking the night. My breath hitched as I imagined approaching footsteps, dragged chains, the faint ragged whisper of someone calling for mercy. My hands shook so hard I could barely lock the door behind me. I flicked on every lamp, the cabin's warm glow a fragile barrier against the void outside. I clutched my flashlight like a lifeline and moved to the window, heart pounding in my ears. There was nothing, only swirling snow and skeletal pines. But I knew the note wasn't a prank. Someone had been here, bleeding, desperate. And as the dying light pooled at the horizon, I realized the true terror wasn't what I saw, it was the question burning in my mind, would I be too late? I grabbed my rifle and stepped into the storm, the wind tearing at my parka like angry claws. Every gust carried the hollow echo of that plea, "Help me before dark," twisting in my mind like a blade. My boots sank into snowy drifts, each step leaving a crater I prayed would guide me back. Ahead, broken branches and smears of blood stained the white canvas, a gruesome breadcrumb trail leading deeper into the pines. My breath rattled in my throat, steam stinging my eyes as I followed the crimson drops. The forest closed in, trunks slick with ice forming a gauntlet of silent sentinels. Shadows pooled at the corners of my vision, teasing shapes that vanished when I spun around. I told myself it was just a flicker of torchlight, or my imagination running wild, yet my heart hammered with irrational dread. A distant groan shredded the silence, low and ragged as though someone fought to drag themselves across the snow. I froze, rifle raised, intent on the sound. Beneath the branches, a figure slumped in a cavity, half buried, trembling, face pale as frost. Relief surged through me so violently I almost raised my rifle to my cheek in mistake, before I realized this was no rescue, it was a nightmare made flesh. His hand reached out, trembling so hard the wet imprint of blood transferred to my glove. He whispered something I couldn't catch, a frantic sound that dissolved into a rasp of pain. The world narrowed to the weight of that hand, the raw metallic scent of his wound, the crack of ice underfoot indicating night was close behind. I slammed the butt of my rifle into his shoulder, shame and terror mingling as I hauled him upright and pressed a strip of my own parka against his bleeding side. Each second stretched into a lifetime as the sky dimmed to bruised purple. In that frozen hush, I realized the true horror. I was tethered to a stranger's life, forced to choose between leading him out or leaving him to die in the merciless cold. Darkness crept closer, and I knew the storm would not wait. I wrapped the stranger's arm against my chest and pushed through the swirling gale, each footfall a battle against snowdrifts that clawed at my legs. The wind tore at my hood, filling my ears with an unholy wail that sounded like distant screams. I tasted blood on my lip from where the cold had cracked my mouth. Behind me, he coughed and moaned, the rasp of pain a cruel metronome counting down our dwindling time before darkness swallowed us whole. The trail back to the cabin vanished as the storm intensified. Trees bent like living things under the weight of ice, their branches snapping with explosive cracks that echoed like gunfire. My heart thundered as I realized I could no longer distinguish between the stranger's footprints and my own. Panic surged. I was leading him blindly into oblivion. I spun in circles, flashlight beams skittering across the white abyss, illuminating nothing but my own frantic breath and the slick gleam of ice crusting his bloodstain. He grabbed my sleeve, eyes wide in dawning terror. "They're watching," he rasped. His words hung between us, more horrifying than any shape in the gloom. I shone the beam past his shoulder and froze, two dark impressions in the snow, too large for a human foot, too deliberate to be animal tracks. They didn't head back toward the cabin, they led onward, deeper into the forest, vanishing into a wall of white. My pulse spiked with raw dread. In that moment, I understood the real horror of this frozen wasteland. Out here, you're never sure who or what is following, and whether it's mercy or malice that drives you forward. I staggered into the cabin, half carrying him, the wind slamming the door behind us like a wounded animal. He collapsed onto the floor, clutching his side where blood bloomed through the makeshift bandage, and I bolted every latch, stacking chairs against the door. My rifle leaned in the corner, a hollow promise of protection. The lantern cast jittering shadows that pulsed across his pale face as he drifted in and out of consciousness, whispering that unseen watchers crept just beyond the walls. I pressed my flashlight against each frost-lined window pane. The snow outside lay undisturbed, no footprints, no evidence of pursuers. Just the tracks we'd made stumbling through the storm, leading here and nowhere else. My stomach knotted. The stranger's rasping breath filled the room, and when I demanded who was watching, his eyes glazed with pain. "It was me," he choked out. "I shot my partner by mistake and left him bleeding in the woods. I wrote the note in panic, used the kid to try and help him." The real terror hit me like a slab of ice. Those footprints, those mysterious watchers, it was all his guilt stalking us both. He broke into ragged sobs, confessing how the storm swallowed his partner alive, how every howl of the wind sounded like a plea for mercy. His confession carved a hollow in my chest colder than any blizzard. In that moment, the horror wasn't supernatural. It was the raw, visceral weight of human failure and brutality echoing through the pines. The storm faded to a dull roar, replaced by the pounding of my own heart as I realized that sometimes the scariest monsters are born from our own hands. By dawn, I'd radio for rescue. The medevac arrived as pale lights spilled across the snow, lifting the blackout of fear. Paramedics swarmed in, stabilizing him, their questions swift and clinical. They found no one else, no phantom footprints, no blood beyond what he bled. Only the partner's frozen gauntlet half buried at the creek's edge. As they loaded him onto the stretcher, I knelt by the window and watched the wind erase our tracks. The cabin stood silent, its walls bearing witness to a horror born of human error, not myth. And in the endless white expanse, I understood that the true terror of the Alaskan wild lies not in phantoms, but in how we carry our darkest deeds into its emptiness. I woke in the dead of night to a tremor shaking the ceiling above me, so light it felt like the cabin itself was shivering with fear. My breath caught in my throat, icy and shallow, as I pressed myself against the pine plank wall. Outside, the wind clawed at the shutters, a low moan that mingled with the creak of wood. My pulse thundered in my ears, each beat a frantic warning that I was not alone. I slid from my bed on bare feet, every nerve alight with dread, and padded toward the attic hatch. The thin beam of my flashlight carved a tunnel of light through the darkness. My hand hovered over the latch, trembling so hard I feared the noise might betray me. When I finally lifted it, the hatch door groaned like a wounded animal, and a frigid draft snaked down the ladder, carrying a hint of something metallic, like dried blood carried on a breath of ice. Climbing up, my heart hammered as the wood groaned beneath my weight. I flicked the light across the narrow attic floor and froze. Tiny footprints, undeniably human, trailed in a ragged line across the aged boards, each print no larger than a child's, smeared with grit and dark stains that gleamed in the beam. They led from a corner where the boards seemed freshly pried loose and vanished beneath a loose shingle overhead. My skin crawled, every hair on my arms standing at harsh attention. I swallowed hard, taste metallic on my tongue, and held the breath I hadn't realized I'd been exhaling. A soft scratch scratched from just above my head, like fingernails teasing the edge of escape. The world contracted to that single, unbearable moment. In that instant, I knew the true horror wasn't the footprints themselves, but what lay beyond the boards, something where someone sculpted from the same wooden shadow, waiting to slip through and confront me in the silence. I pressed my cheek against the rough plank beside the loose shingle, flashlight beam bouncing across a gaping slit in the roof. My breath slammed in my chest as I inched a trembling hand toward the jagged edge. Beneath the opening, I caught sight of something, no larger than a fist, slathered in dark, congealed fluid. A child's mitten, stiff and frozen, crusted with frost, and who knew what else? My stomach lurched as the wind gusted, forcing me to step back, ice shards rattling like distant teeth. Above me, the loose shingle shifted with a soft, deliberate scrape. My pulse ricocheted in my temples while the attic swallowed my flashlight's beam, reducing me to a pinprick of light in an endless void. I flicked the torch upward and glimpsed a pale shape, a small handprint etched into the snow atop the roof, smeared with grit and something more sinister. The print trembled in the dim glow, as if someone had pressed their palm there only moments ago, then climbed inside, right above me. A sudden thunk reverberated through the ceiling, like a boot heel striking bare wood. My legs went slack and I slid against the wall, heart hammering so loud I could taste it. I swung the flashlight toward the hatch behind me. There, imprinted in the dust around the latch, were more tiny footprints, leading down the ladder. They ended abruptly at the bottom rung, as though whoever ascended had vanished into shadow. My throat constricted in raw panic. I realized the attic was no longer a loft of forgotten storage but a threshold to something terrifyingly real, perched just out of sight and ready to slip into my world. I pressed my shoulder into the pried board and it shattered with a splintering crack that sent shards raining down like frozen daggers. A rancid breath hit my face, cold, fetid, as if rot itself had found its way into the attic. My pulse hammered so violently I could taste it, metallic and desperate, as I swung the flashlight into the yawning cavity. Two wide, terrified eyes glimmered in the gloom, sunken, roar-rimmed, alive with a mixture of starvation and dread. A tiny frame curled into itself, each rib a sharpened ridge beneath translucent skin. My knees buckled, and I dropped the beam, catching only a flash of filthy hair matted against a pale skull. A faint sob escaped me, though I wasn't sure if it came from him or from the cavern in my own chest. "Please," he rasped, voice cracking like ice underfoot. The word hung between us, small and fragile, yet heavier than any scream. My hands shook as I reached forward, fingertips brushing frost-caked denim. He recoiled, eyes blurring with tears, pure fear radiating off him in waves. And in that instant, the attic transformed from a den of phantom footprints into the most horrifying place on earth, the desperate hideout of a broken child. Below, a single footstep thudded on the stairs, slow, deliberate, and closer than any human should dare. My heart seized. I backed away, gripping a loose board as if it were a lifeline, my mind a battleground of mercy and terror. If I move to help him, I leave myself exposed. If I don't, he dies here, frozen into nothing. The floor groaned under that step on the stairs, and I realized the night's true horror wasn't the ghost I'd imagined, but the real, living fear crouched before me and whoever was coming for us both. My legs shook as the last footstep on the stairs stalled, a pregnant pause before the world erupted into motion. I lunged forward and scooped the child into my arms, adrenaline searing every nerve. His body was so small, so fragile, that I nearly dropped him, but instinct drove me to shove him behind a stack of old crates. The foul odor of damp wood and dust stung my nostrils as I pressed my back against the wall, rifle clutched so tightly my knuckles went white. The hatch above me trembled, someone was climbing down. My pulse pounded in my throat like a warning drum. Then the attic door burst open with a splintering crack, and a man loomed in the beam, his parka caked with snow and his eyes pinwheeling with panic. The child's whimper cut through the gale of my panic. "Where is he?" the man rasped, voice ragged as if he'd been shouting into the void. He lunged forward, arms outstretched. Every instinct screamed monster, yet something in his face, a flicker of desperate terror, made my finger hover over the trigger. "Stay back!" I barked, my voice raw. He froze, snow melting off his shoulders into tiny puddles at his feet. The child peeked through the crates, blue lips quivering. The man's knuckles whitened as he lowered his hands. "He's my son," he stammered. "I got separated in the storm. I followed your footprints." His confession landed like an ice axe between us. Rage and relief crashed together in my chest. I tightened my grip on the rifle, torn between relief that the threat was human and horror at how near violence had come. Sirens cut through the wind, the distant wail of a ranger's truck. The man's face went slack. I eased the rifle down, stepping into the narrow shaft of light. The child ran to him, collapsing into trembling arms. The man buried his face in the boy's hair, sobbing. I watched them go, footsteps fading as they stumbled toward salvation. The attic felt impossibly empty, the dust motes dancing in the lantern glow like forgotten ghosts. No specter had stalked me that night, only the raw, terrifying reality of a parent's panic and a stranger's mercy. In the merciless Alaskan dark, the most bone-chilling terror lies not in phantoms, but in the choices we make when fear draws its blade. Don't forget to subscribe for more chilling stories, and leave a like if this one kept you on edge. Watch the next videos for even darker tales, and let me know in the comments if this story got under your skin.